Hope you can't hear the dogs in the background there.
Okay, so Article 4 of the head cuts point attack. The perpendicular head cut can only be taken by forming a moulinet in front of you, which ends by lunging. Moulinet is formed by making an ascending circle with the sabre's point, with the handle being the axis, the arm well outstretched, and the hand allied with the chest. There are many different moulinets. I refer back to the article in which I discuss them for a better explanation. As with the other head cuts, which cut it either diagonally or transversely, they are not employed alone, but with other cuts and with feints. I refer back to the articles which will discuss these different parts. So an image of head cut and parry. The attacking thrusts are ordinarily good only when they are joined to other cuts, or it takes a great vivacity to use them. The thrust in court is formed, as with the small sword, by disengaging from tierce to court, nails up, and by sending it to the opponent's chest. The tierce thrust is the opposite. The third thrust, which is the one taken by evading underneath the opponent's wrist, the hand entirely turned, the sword's branch on top, is the one called second to the point. First double hit of point. If you have engaged in court, you disengage finally in tierce by lunging the nails underneath. The adversary on this attack backs out while parrying. Then you double the détente, turn the hand a little, pointing underneath the wrist of your adversary and sending your second thrust in second. Second double hit. You lunge and thrust in second. Your adversary parries with the point down. You rotate the wrist, nails up, and send court over the weapon by doubling the détente. Third double hit. Send in court. By lunging inside the weapons, your adversary parries low by retreating. You disengage rapidly with turning the hand by doubling the détente, and you send court over the weapons. Fourth double hit with feint. You deliver in second under the wrist. Your opponent parries. You thrust to the face by putting the left foot next to the right, the hand and nails in the air. You return rapidly the nails underneath. By doubling the détente, you resend the second hit to the flank of your opponent. Fifth double hit. You lunge by sending a court thrust under the weapons. You make a feint in second without lowering the hand, turning it underneath, putting the left foot against the right. Rapidly in court, you double the détente by sending your thrust to the chest of the adversary. I will duck off now and go and sort out the dogs and the children.
All right, thank you. Cool. Well, I'll take my earpiece out. But one thing I think definitely needs to be specified for all the sort of, frothing at the mouth members in the community who've heard the term double hit. He's not talking about a double in modern HEMA parlance where both two fences hit each other at the same time. He's talking about a redouble, what would be probably more commonly called a redouble, where you make one attack and then in quick succession throw a second attack. So something I found really cool about that section is it answered the thing that we were talking about before, which is where is the high cut, where is the cut along this line? And he just described it as a cut to the head. So you see very clearly that this is parried with a high tierce, which is why I was sure from before there was a high tierce guard system. But all he's doing is that, where he's coming in at the head. And I think what the reason for that is basically this attack is not really going to hit the body, can't come along, it's going to come high just because if the sword arm is at all outstretched, it's going to intersect. So you're either going to hit the upper bit of the sword arm, like the upper shoulder, or the head. And, if you're in that position, you might as well go for the head. So I guess that kind of answers our question from before of where is this cut? And he's also sort of coming across the sword. All right, so he's got his doubles. He's got a lot of them. He's got the thrusts. So, sort of the predictable one. So, you disengage with your cart and come in with your cart thrust. I find with the saber, with this kind of sword, it's quite fruitful to disengage and turn as you go because the weapon is slower and slower in the balance is better suited to that. Comparatively with, if I'm, for instance, an epee, and I'm doing basically this motion, I find it better to disengage and then turn. I find turning to disengage can kind of confuse the point a bit. But it's not a problem. It's not, you know, you might criticize it as being slow, but I find that because the weapon is so quick and the motion so short, it's easy to disengage and then turn and go, rather than trying to sort of compact your motions together. What type of disengage and thrust he means, I'm not sure. I suspect it would depend on the weapon. From what I understand, a lot of this manual is written for which is essentially called a spadroon. So all the spadroon stands out there can rejoice that there is pretty close to a manual specifically for their favorite weapon, which is basically a compromise between a broadsword and a small sword, where you've got a very, very chunky, very, very chunky small sword, or alternatively, a very, very light broadsword that you can quickly thrust with. But yeah, so he's got, you know, if you started here, you disengage, lunge and cut. Alternatively, you just bring your tip and line and come in tierce. And then the other one, he says, you come in under the hand, the back of the sword pointing up, which I think what he means is you come in and you're coming in like this, and I assume lowering. I don't know, with something like this, it's very fruitful to lower your hand, basically to force your opponent to go lower and lower and lower, in the hope of still getting them with just a deeper and deeper lunge, although it can be as gentle as just that. So thrusting with the hand in this vertical position. And the reason I think it's that, other than his description, is in French hand terminology. There's not really a number for the hand held exactly vertically. You've got sort of, prime, second, tierce, quart, quint, and so on. They don't really describe this hand position. So I think that's why he's describing it that way. And then each of the others, like each of his doubles is some there. I'm not going to go through all of them necessarily, but they seemingly are just some variant of thrust and then cut. And I think that's also where he talks about that, the sort of what he talked about at the start. I'll just move back so you can definitely see my feet, where in contrapoint, you have movements where the feet basically come close together, which he says is not something you see in foil, which I haven't really seen that movement in foil. So that's probably where, what he's referring to, where he's like, right, you need thrust. And then to redouble, you come forward and you actually bring your back foot up. And depending on how you do it, whether it's, with two thrusts or a thrust and a cut, you can remain safe just through forming very strong opposition and basically bearing in on your opponent. Or alternatively, it's something that's very, very useful against an opponent who over-defends. If you've got an opponent who likes to throw these really committed parries, that can actually, if your opponent's parries are over-committed, that can give you a window to then come in. And so I think that's kind of the other utility of this. But yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts and demonstration. I'll this. So yeah, what do you think? Do you agree with my assessment that the reason he didn't have, a cut along this angle in the previous section is because he was listing the other cuts as cuts to the body, whereas as far as he's concerned, this is, that's always has to be done as a cut to the head because you just can't get at the body if the sword arm's in the way. Yeah, what are your other thoughts? Turning it over to everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that he, in this section, outlines these sort of two-part moves, these advances while, thrusting and then cutting, or cutting and then thrusting, but doesn't really outline what the opponent is doing during this. it's sort of like I'm wondering, is the opponent parrying and retreating? Are they, you know, to countercut? It's kind of not clear.
Sorry, go on.
No, you go. I've talked too much.
Okay. He actually says, at least in the French version, that for example, the first one, so you're in tierce, and then the adversary parries and retreats, and that's when you attack again. And it's interesting that it's been pointed out that this is not something that is done in fleuret, which not too familiar with the fleuret of that era. But that's actually what Grisier also tells you, that he doesn't understand that this seems like a suicide move, and that no normal fencer would let you just attack one and then attack again without even making a riposte. However, there are like early 18th century texts where I believe you can just attack again. It just, if you can just see that you're faster than your enemy, just attack again. And de la Touche, Philibert de la Touche, I believe he just told you that you just can oppress a very defensive person by just harassing them like that.
But I would assume that sort of thing is what English fencers might call time of the hand. It's kind of holding your ground footwork-wise and oppressing their guard. Whereas these are very specifically footwork-based. Like the footwork he outlined at the very first section is what he's outlining here. So it's very much two separate lunges, which seems kind of slow unless you have some idea of what the opponent is doing.
It might also be about the assumptions of who you're fencing. What it says, it shows the difference between you're fencing a friend, let's play our sport, and I am assaulting you. Yeah, well, I guess it kind of echoes what I was saying as well, where it's like, it kind of depends on the assumptions of, what you're fencing against, because there's a whole bunch of things that just don't happen in fencing school in like the Sale. And this is true today. This is my sort of experience as a fencer. There's a whole bunch of stuff that just doesn't happen very much in the Sale, because everyone who fences has a degree of training before, of technical training before they actually start bouting. But there's a whole sort of wonderful world of stuff that happens when you fence people with very little experience or with people with very different experience. So many years ago, I kind of made as much effort as I could to fence people who had done other systems, done completely alien things, or who were maybe just very athletic. And I did have the opportunity to encounter a good variety of them at university. And you do, that thing of, and you do have that thing where you, when people back off, you have to redouble at them, and that is actually quite an important skill, which I think might also, and it might that might also be the difference between Ravel and Grissard. Completely forgot how to pronounce the name. Sorry, Damien.
Grisier, sorry, Grisier.
Grisier. No, I'm sorry. I'm the one who's butchering the French language. But it might be the difference is Grisier is thinking much more in terms of what is done in the cell, whereas Ravel is thinking more in terms of his experience, like traveling around fencing, and also potentially fighting, or at the very least fencing people who do very, very different systems to him. And Jacob adds, maybe my confusion comes to the fact that I have anxiety, and my response to aggression to other people is to lash out rather than retreat and keep myself safe. And then has added, Tim will attest, I very much parry forwards. You do really get in there. Yeah, well, it's actually, I did a video a while back on my experiences fencing when my anxiety got really, really, really bad. And yeah, that's the thing you do is when you get anxious, you tend to lash out. Or I find, although I have met people who are very anxious who over retreat, what they'll do is they'll basically just backwards run at whatever you do. And incidentally, that's when these kinds of redoubling or these, redoubling motions, these doubles would be very, very helpful. Or are very helpful is you throw something at someone, they defend and retreat. And you then have to very, very quickly do another, double up your lunge and do something else to take advantage of the fact that they're very committed. And honestly, like if this is, as a skill for fencing people who are maybe not as practiced, or who just do weird different stuff and will back off unless they know what you're doing, this is a really, really useful skill to have. So let's see, get some more comments. Jacob has.
That's why it's kind of interesting that you that there's no mention of what that was very dependent, right?
Sorry, Jacob, can you say that again? You just kind of fuzzed in and out. Hello,
Sorry,
Jacob, are you there?
Yes, my internet is not very good, sorry.
That's okay.
That's why it feels strange that there's no mention in this section of what the opponent is doing, because it feels very system and fencer dependent, how one responds to that kind of a threat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, potentially if he's listing all the stuff that he thinks you should practice. I think Damien said in the French version, he does say what he expects the opponent to do. So yeah, but if it is, in just terms of here's a big list of things you should practice, it kind of makes sense. Although unfortunately, it means we need to sort of reverse engineer the context.
Yeah. Well, I just assume they are like parrying and retreating because he says it once, and then I assume that's always what the other person is doing. But having read like a bit of foil fencing, the early text at least, they say that, well, basically if you don't know what the enemy is doing, you just parry and retreat because you want to be safe in all cases. So I expect that's what's happening here, but also Grisier tells you that, well, that only works against an ignorant. Yeah, why not? And he also criticizes in regards to who is he fencing against. Later, Valville tells you something like someone is running at you with his saber raised over his head with the intent of killing you. So of course Grisier is a bit shocked by that, who is doing that, who would even do that and qualify himself as a fencer. So there's a bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah, no, actually that probably explains most of the criticism actually, where it's just like, where Vel is like, when someone comes at you madly swinging, this is what you do, and Grisier is like, who does that? That's actually, although that's a thing interesting enough in some of the late 19th century British sources, they talk about, oh yeah, you actually have to know what to do when someone is not attacking you the way you get attacked in a fencing cell. You actually have to know what to do if someone just comes at you with big aggressive cuts. And this is actually Hutton, weirdly enough, one of the reasons he reckons that doing 19th century historical fencing, like looking backwards to the Middle Ages, was really, really helpful. Is it meant it gave a lot of insights into what to do in those situations, because a lot of historical, like medieval manuals, describe a lot more explicitly what to do. Cool. So just got some more comments in the chat, which I'll read out. So Mosh says you see it a lot in big battle games, a lot of the assaulting kind of stuff, which feels like this, shines in LARP and so forth. That's good. Well, I'm glad that this sort of stuff shines in LARP, because I did try and pitch this workshop to LARP as going, learn things that are going to help you in LARP. But yeah, no, I think I'd agree with that. Like, I mean, a lot of where I learned, well, I learned about redoubling. Not that I'm particularly good at it, but I try to be. Was in reenactment where same sort of thing where people will just back off, like they'll just be like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just gonna move away. Yeah, and then David Gresham says, "Hail, thank you for perspective. So good to have a nice dose of sword talk in these lockdowns. Have to dock off now to yourself." Thank you, David. I'm sorry I read that out before realizing what it said, but yeah, thank you, David, for glad you enjoyed it. Cool. So yeah, does anyone have any other comments? This sort of stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I remember reading a book, I forget which one, about historical fencing masters, and I think it might have even been Silver, who was saying that you don't want a fencing master who has a secret move that he's going to impart to you. You want a fencing master who will give you instruction in a form of fencing, which will, as you were saying earlier on, which will be a school of fencing, which will give you a range of attacks and defences which you can use. And perhaps these are his 3 favourite moves that he's imparting.
Yeah, that's sort of. Well, I think that's a very good advice for martial arts in general. Is don't learn from people who have secret moves. Like just learn from people who will tell you how to fence from day one. I remember when I first did boxing, after having done many years of all these other martial arts, one of the things that amazed me was the immediacy of it. Like I learned more in the first 3-4 months of boxing than I had in like in some cases in 10 years of other martial arts, just because the way it was set out was right. What can we do to get you sparring effectively quickly? So yeah, I think it's probably a good observation with this, where it's just like, what can we do to get you fencing effectively quickly? Yeah. So.
Arts, a kind of the kind of fun trick, fun quick tip that will make you a great fencer, sort of thing, seems to make more sense with an armed martial art than an unarmed one, because the fact that the fight can end so quickly.
Yeah.
In the 18th century.
So another comment from Ben. He says, I find all these moves by Vavel work when the opponent goes to make a parry but doesn't find the blade before you move on to the next part of the action. Yeah, no, it's that's I think also why he's probably practicing these compound moves, because it gets you very smooth at it, and you can actually do that where you can basically make the move and then your opponent can't find the blade before you start. Yeah, that's a really, really good observation. And then he said, yes, there's high criticism in the books regarding secret moves. I vote secrets during the 18th century. Yeah, it's interesting because if you go back earlier, the way fencing masters would advertise is by listing all the moves they can teach you. So I wonder if maybe that was a bit of in the 18th century, there was maybe in France that was there was like a transition way of it. There are people starting to criticize that and starting to say, no, look, that's a really dumb way to learn fencing. So no, can you kind of expand on your comment a bit, Damien? Or?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I'm saying 18th century, but actually the one that comes to mind are end of the 17th century. So it's Charles Bénard and again Philibert de la Touche. And yes, they seem to be exposed to this sort of secret techniques market that some masters seem to rely on, and they tend to really frown upon that and put that in their books because they have something to say about it.
Okay, do you know? So do you know why this sort of comes out when it does? It's I know to compare to Britain, that's what I'm familiar with. like in Britain, certainly by the 18th century, even 17th, like even through a lot of the 17th, the idea of secret techniques was, and like learning through that kind of pedagogy would have been very foreign, because Britain had this really strong combat sport tradition, with like backswording and cudgel play and single stick. So the way they were teaching increasingly was the way, you learn any other kind of sport, where you learn how to do the movements, and you learn you learn the technique of, throwing a cart in the same way you learn the technique of throwing a ball. But it's all all of the learning is very front loaded, and the idea is, for the most part, you're just going to go out and play. And I'm wondering if maybe there's a sort of a similar transition, or like what's going on in French society that's actually prompted that change and prompted people to go, well, secret techniques are a bit rubbish, and I'm going to rant about them in my book.
Well, the impression I got, I didn't do the research on what's actually happening, but from the books, it seems to be like you learn secret techniques in order to not die in a duel. So they criticize these techniques as being people that learn quick and fast. These techniques just go to like 1 or 2 fencing classes, which of course is not good for the fencing masters. They learn these techniques, they go in a duel and they get killed. So of course they have a problem with that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Much says sales is a powerful thing. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So it's sort of, like this criticism is people are not, like they're not actually learning to fence, they're just learning kind of quick and nasty techniques.
Well, the thing was, a secret technique was designed if the student turned on the master, he still had some things up his sleeve to use.
Mm.
Not
Yeah.
good advising if your students die on you.
Well, if he's turned on you with a sword, it's probably time for him to go.
It's like context. Depends on how desperate you are for students as well, I guess. Does anyone have any other comments on this section, or just, I mean, we kind of got a bit off topic there, but it's half the fun of talking about swords is getting off topic. Does anyone have any other comments?
I was just going to make a general point. A general point with Valville seems to be that he doesn't actually give the reasons behind the cuts or the things that he's telling you to do. I can't really see any form to what he's doing. And maybe it's because we've come from a background of hunting, which is very structured.
Yeah, on Hutton's, I mean, I think part of that as well. Like, even when I went through Hutton, I tried to give it a degree of structure. Like, I mean, I think also that might be kind of my influence, where I'm very, very application focused. Like, and that's also that is a bit of a HEMA thing, where, because we don't actually know what the stuff is for necessarily. Part of the learning process is applying it, but I think also like with like with me, particularly just as a martial artist, I try to be very application focused, because I find if a person knows what the outcome is, they can kind of fill in the gaps on their own. And although Hutton is very structured, because he's trying to give a curriculum, and I find of a lot of the 19th century fencing manuals, Hutton is very, very, here is a lot of stuff. He is very, very structured. Whereas it was Chapman who I was reading recently. He kind of just starts talking and then just doesn't stop. He has paragraphs that are like half a page long in some cases. And what he's talking about, like the topic of the paragraph at the start and the topic at the end, are not the same, and the topic in the middle is different again. So it's sort of, but yeah, no, it is, I think, I don't know, maybe it's in Vavel's mind, the application is obvious, or maybe it's a thing where he's just not really thought to mention it, or maybe it's something that's in the French version. I don't know.
Perhaps it's like we've been saying, that this is meant to be a piece which is meant to be read and applied by someone who already has a background in small sword, or fencing. So he doesn't put too much background into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely something about that. These texts were written for eventually instructors to help them develop fencing with their soldiers. And this one, Valville, is different from like Saint Martin. Valville is just here's a bunch of techniques and how they're named. Other texts like Saint Martin are basically pieces. It's piece one, you feint to the head, he parries high, then you go here, and it's like on foot, it's like 20 pieces just like that. You feint to the head, and then blah blah blah. And here it's only the techniques. It's like quick quick sum up of what you should know. But then, comparing it to Hutton, it's like Hutton late down the 19th century, they start to become more structured and, less like this. So this is early 19th century, so it's still a bit weird in regards to where he wanted to go with that.
Well, the other aspect as well is if they're not, I mean, there's certainly a very literate society by this stage. I mean, you would have had 70, 80% adult literacy in a lot of Europe. But books are still expensive and not super common. They're common, but it's not like you'd have like massive libraries in your house unless you're quite wealthy. Whereas when Hutton's writing, he's writing when printing technology had improved in leaps and bounds. The point where, like, when Hutton wants to republish, say, Swettenham or Silver, knowing that there's only a very small niche audience that he can do it because the printing technology is there that you can do. You can pump out a small run of something fairly quickly. So he's in a much more literate culture, which also means he has the benefit of being very used to reading written instructions. I think also like when Revel was writing, like this was only at the start of the period where you have where military manuals there was an attempt to have completely military manuals for everything rather than just sort of the core skill that you couldn't learn elsewhere. And it's certainly with British, actually with French, with the Jonesville Academy. There's a big part of that was actually trying to create standard manuals, the stuff that was otherwise learned ad hocly through our oral tradition, which is also why there's a whole bunch of French martial arts we don't have any sources for before the 19th century. Even though we have records and stuff that they go back a lot further. So it's sort of, the thing as well is like, he might not, it might be that he's attempting to create a structured curriculum. He just doesn't really know how to do it. He's just not as good at doing it in book form because he's not actually learnt from structured written curriculums as much as someone who's writing, 70, 80 years later.
There's a bit of that because his French is not exactly as good as Grisier, for example. So they lived at the same time, but Grisier is far more literate than Valville, at least from what I see. And there's the thing that in the Napoleonic army, I got that from Julien Gary, who can't be here today, but that every instructor had his own method of instructing saber. So he's doing his thing, and we don't even know if we can use some other text to fill the gaps, because he had his method and he's basically doing his thing. We can't know.
Yeah. Well, it's probably time to move on, especially because Zoe's gotten back. We managed to stall enough that Jacob didn't have to read anything. So, Zoe, you good to keep moving? You to move on, or?
I think Zoe's gone to sleep.
And so, she might. I thought she said.
No, I'm here. It's fine. I'm here.
Cool. All right, cool. Are we good to move to the next section?
It's 10 o'clock, 10:15.
All right, in that case,
Keep going. Jacob can read if you want to keep going.
I'm going to go. I'm going to say thank you. I'll go tomorrow. I'll see you next week. It's Cutlass next week, isn't it?
no, next week is Renaissance Italian single sword. So same kind of format as this. Moving through, like, although I might reduce the number of plays I expect to get through. Cool, but yeah, look, do let me know if we're going to stop here. I'd love to do the rest of this manual at some point. Like, I'm really enjoyed kind of working through it. And I actually find it really, like, it's a really, really interesting contrast with the Sabre and stuff I've done.
Yeah.
So yeah, just let me know in the comments, or post an event stuff if you want to do the next few sections sometime down the track. And yeah, other than that, Mosh has said he's really keen to keep going when you're available. Damien said totally. All right, so I think we're going to be doing more of this. So the next one we're doing is Italian Renaissance single sword, and then I've got doing a Cutlass workshop after that. So what we might do is, so next week is Italian Renaissance single sword. The week after is just a straight up Cutlass workshop. So kind of the more traditional, Tim teaches people learn format.
Thank you for the night. Appreciate it. And
no problem.
Much enjoyed. And I'll see you next week, hopefully. Thanks.
Right, see you next week.
And girls, thank you.
All right, bye. All right, cool. So yeah, so but I mean the main point is, like, we're going to be doing something every week until COVID ends.
The end of
so,
the year.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. I mean,
10 years in the future.
Yeah, I know. It's sort of, this has got to be the lamest dystopia ever. Just the at-home dystopia. It's not even zombies. Yeah. So we're going to be doing something every week, and I'll post in each event.
Zombies.
I beg your pardon, sorry, Jacob.
We trained with swords for years, and there's not even any zombies.
I think that's going to be quite a night. Anyway, I might stop recording now. So thank you to anyone who's watched through this whole thing. I hope you enjoyed it. Certainly, if you're watching the recordings, or even if you were here and just want to keep talking about it, do post, post in the comments and share and subscribe, I guess. And yeah, so from here, we're still going to hang around. It's just I'm going to have a glass of wine and talk more about swords. Because normally I have a beer, but I figured because we're doing a French system, I'd have a glass of wine instead. And yeah, you're more than welcome to hang around. I'm just going to stop recording though.
Yeah. Time for a beer.